Alright guys, back again with another video. This is part 3 of the Mini-RECCE build series, and today we're going to talk about optics selection, a pretty important part of the build process. So I don't necessarily want this to be a super long video, so I'm not going to do necessarily a review on either one of these optics, but I'm just going to talk about what I'm looking for in a scope for a build like this and why I kind of put priority on certain aspects of an optic. So in general, what kind of scope do I think you should be looking for? Obviously it's an LPVO, low power variable optic, something that goes from 1 power all the way up to 6, 8, 10, that allows you to have some speed up close, but then also be able to crank it up to max magnification and be able to get good hits at target and really be able to see what you're hitting. So over the last, 10 years, I've owned and sold quite a few different scopes. I have black rifle disease, so it's a real problem, but you know, the list of ones that I've owned, LPVO specifically, that I have experience with, loopholed CQB-SS, I've owned, probably 3 of those over the years and bought them and sold them. I really do like that scope for what it is. It's kind of expensive. I've owned a Schmidt & Bender short dot 1.1 to 4 by 20. I've owned the short dot 1 to 8, the short dot CC 1 to 8, which is the second focal plane version. Obviously now running the dual CC. I've also owned a Night Force ATACR 1 to 8. And then in the Razor series, I've owned the Gen 3 1 to 10, and now given a try with the HD Gen 2 E. So I've owned a few, and I kind of have an idea what I think works in that category. And so for me, I just really want to talk about the top 3 features that I'm looking for in an LPVO that I think aids in this style of build, where you're trying to do both, right? The ideal rifle, the do-all rifle is kind of a myth, right? And we can all end up chasing it and have different ideas of what that should look like. So again, for me, LPVO is the best option. Obviously, yeah, you can run a piggyback red dot, and that's not a problem. But from a feature set point, we want to be able to have everything we need with a scope to do everything from 7 yards out to 500, 600, 700 yards. So anyway, the number 1 feature on my list is daylight bright illumination. And so when I say daylight bright, there's a lot of scopes out there that advertise illuminated reticles. And I'm telling you, an illuminated reticle and a daylight bright reticle are not the same thing at all. In my mind, there's only certain brands, there's only certain manufacturers that make certain models of scopes that are truly daylight bright. And so for me, the Razor, super bright. I mean, compared to pretty much every one of those ones that I listed off, I haven't looked through an NX8, but I mean, if it's bright enough that you hardly ever use max setting because it's too bright, then your scope is pretty bright. You know what I mean? To be honest, the Schmidt & Bender, the illumination isn't as bright as the Razor, no doubt. I end up putting it on the highest setting, a lot of the time when shooting outside and in the sun and stuff. But it is adequate, right? So for me, it has to be that way, because when it's on 1 power, you want to be able to have a big contrast in that center aiming point as opposed to what you're aiming. And so, relying on an etched reticle, all the time is just not ideal, I think, in that situation. So when you're trying to go fast and do that stuff at, 5, 10, 7 yards, it really helps having a dot that can really keep up and really draw your eye to it. And so for me, daylight bright illumination. All the scopes that I listed off, I would consider all those daylight bright. Keep in mind though, even in the daylight bright spectrum, some of those are a lot brighter than others. I mean, the short dot 1 to 8, the short dot CC 1 to 8 that I had, that was the second focal plane. I mean, it really wasn't that great, to be honest. Was the daylight bright? Yeah. Would it get washed out in bright sunlight? Yeah, it totally would. So just keep that in mind. You know, I think scopes have come a long way, even in the last, 5 or 7 years. We've got things on the market now that weren't even an option, you know what I mean, 10 years ago. So things are getting better, but as a first-time buyer, understand that there is a big difference between having a scope that says it's got an illuminated reticle, which yes, it will turn red, but that's not the same thing as what we consider daylight bright. The second thing I'm looking for feature-wise is obviously glass quality. So there's a lot of scopes on the market, and I feel like the market has increased in a certain price range, right? And so I think that there's a lot of guys that just don't want to spend the money, you know what I mean, that are getting into their first AR. They've got a build that maybe costs $500 or $600, and the idea of putting a scope that costs something like these on there is just seems crazy, right? But it's not. I'm here to tell you, it's not crazy. It's okay. But I get it. So thinking that the $300, $400, $500 scope, if it on paper, if it has the same magnification range, it has tactical turrets, it's got a tactical reticle. On paper, yeah, it can look like there's not a big difference between these. But I'm telling you, if that's the only thing that you've looked through is that $500 scope, then that's what you're going to use. But understand that when you pay for quality glass, the things that you get out of it are the ability to really see clearly out to distance. And let's be honest, some scopes that do have good glass quality may be better on 1 power feature-wise than they are on 8 power, right? The field of view on the Razor is huge. It's not that big on the Schmidt & Bender, you know what I mean? But, the glass quality is straight up better on the Schmidt & Bender. So when I'm prone, and shooting at 500 or 600 yards with this, when there's not a lot of sunlight out, the ability for me to see clearly, the light transmission on this is better, so that allows me to really see where the target is, see where my hits are going, and I think there's value in that. Now obviously, we can talk about diminishing returns in terms of cost, because this, you can just Google it. Find out what the MSRP is. But I think that everybody's trying to strike this balance of cost and performance, and I think when you go so low on the cost, you're only going to get a certain level of performance. You're only going to be able to get a certain quality of glass, and it's really up to you to decide if that is acceptable for what you're trying to do. I guess what I'm saying is, I feel like your performance is going to be limited in what you can do based on the quality of the glass. So keep that in mind. The third thing that I think is important, obviously, in these is having a true 1 power. Some of those scopes I listed off were 1.1, and that didn't really bother me that much. But on the dual CC, the thing that I really noticed is, if you put this on 1 power, and obviously when I say dual CC, so it has below 1.1, it has a CC mode, so it's true absolute 1 power. When you put this on 1 power, and let's just say you're indoors, right, and you're maybe 5 yards away from a wall, when you draw the gun up and put it to your eye, and you leave both eyes open, I'm right eye dominant. What I see through the lens in my right eye, when I focus on my left eye, and look, 24 inches or 3 feet away from the wall that I'm looking at, the image is the same, right? There's zero distortion. It's like I'm not even looking through a lens, because both my eyes see the exact same thing. And I don't know if that makes sense, but what I'm trying to say is a true 1 power is going to make it easier for you to shoot both eyes open. When you have good illumination, you're going to be able to just find the target, center that dot on the target, and make a shot when you're trying to go fast. And so, having something higher than a true 1 power, to me, it's like I spend a little bit of extra time with my brain trying to compute the fact that one eye is seeing a slightly magnified image and the other one is not. And so that kind of a little bit slows me down, I've noticed. But again, just something to keep in mind. So to me, those are the top 3 things. Other things do matter. One thing is a reticle. So if you compare the reticles in both of these, obviously, the Vortex is a really simple reticle. Not really a great ability to hold for wind. And so, this is a really great scope, especially on 1 power, and the glass is clear. But because of the reticle on the Schmidt & Bender, I feel like I've got a lot more capability, because now I've got, holds. I've got a super thin reticle, and, if I'm shooting out to 500, my dope is around 4 mils. So I can totally hold that within the reticle, be on it quick. If I need to hold a 0.5 mil left or right for wind, I can do it. Things like that are a little bit easier when you have, what we would consider a Christmas tree reticle. And so just keep that in mind also. Some of these scopes do perform better on the low end as opposed to the high end. Some are better on the high end than the low end, but I think if you try and, intersect all these things of price, good illumination, quality glass, I think you end up in kind of this almost narrow range. And so keep that in mind, whether you guys have tried one of these. If you have any comments about one that I didn't list that you guys think has good illumination, some of these other things, let me know. I don't have that many rounds on the Razor so far, so we'll give it a shot, but I'm really liking the field of view and stuff on low power. So, all right, guys, we'll keep plugging along on the Mini-RECCE series, and again, thanks for all the likes and comments. Keep them coming. Talk to you next time.